Being intelligent in theory should be an advantage, but in practice it can become a trap. Have you noticed that sometimes when it shows you know more than others, the reaction is not admiration? Is it uncomfortable? Instead of recognition, it receives resistance. Instead of respect, veiled hostility. It is as if by showing its light, it automatically made a point of overshadowing who is next to it. And for many people, this is unbearable. Intelligence, when not accompanied by emotional. Intelligence becomes a two-edged knife. And this is exactly the point that Schopenhauer, one of the most sharp and misunderstood philosophers of the 19th century, brutally understood clearly. For him, sporting wisdom is one of the most effective ways to create silent enemies. We live in a society that, although it says values the merit, fears everything that reveals its own limitations. Whoever thinks so much sees too much, and who sees too much bothers. Therefore, the sharp mind can be perceived as a threat, not as virtue. This is where the paradox Schopenhauer presents. True wisdom may be in less than you are, not to hide, but to preserve. Preserve relationships, preserve your peace, and mainly, preserve its power. Because the most subtle and more effective power is not to impose itself, but to observe, in listening more than talking, understanding when it shines, and when to let the other shine, even by mistake. Schopenhauer invites us to review the instinct to prove that we are right. He proposes an uncomfortable but liberating reversal, the art of seeming less to achieve more. This is the starting point, the provocation that challenges intellectual pride and leads us on a path where the ego gives way to strategy, where vanity gives way to vision, and where the true intelligent is the one who knows when he doesn't seem intelligent. Before becoming the philosopher known for his deep pessimism and relentless vision of human nature, Arthur Schopenhauer was just a brilliant and arrogant young man. At 19, he received a letter from his own mother who, with the frankness of those who knew him deeply, made a criticism that would mark him forever. She said that although he was intelligent, his need to prove it to everyone made him unbearable, and worse, it diminished the brightness of your intelligence. This letter was not a simple maternal scolding. It was a key turn. Schopenhauer began to carefully observe the effects of intelligence on human relations. He realized that as much as knowledge is valuable, he also carries an invisible risk to isolate, to create resentment, to transform virtues into obstacles. From this, its philosophy began to incorporate a practical, almost strategic element, the importance of disguising its own brightness, not for cowardice but for wisdom. He realized that the problem was not in being smart, but to want to demonstrate it all the time. Excessively exposed intelligence hurts the ego of others, and the injured ego does not react with admiration, reacts with defense, attack with removal. Even without realizing it, we create barriers around when we make our mind a showcase. Schopenhauer then begins to treat modesty, or rather the appearance of modesty, as a kind of armor, a shield against the side effects of genius, and his philosophy becomes an invitation to something that many would call theater, but which he saw as art, the art of seeming less to preserve more. What your mother pointed out was more than a personal defect. It was a reflection of human nature. No one likes to feel inferior, and the intellect, when exposed without sensitivity, transforms any environment into a field of comparison. The lesson was hard, but for Schopenhauer it is necessary. He understood that mastering the world of ideas requires, rather, learning to navigate the emotions of others. Few concepts sound as against intuitive as this. Pretend ignorance as a strategy of power. In a world that awards performance, mastery, intellectual brightness, why would anyone choose to look less than it is? For Schopenhauer, this choice was not weakness, it was force in disguise, the art of making silly works because it disarms. When you do not represent a direct threat, the defenses fall. People open, reveal themselves. By downloading your guard, you allow others to keep them intact, and it makes them feel safe by your side. And when someone feels safe, you get something that intelligence, alone, can't influence. This is the logic behind strategic concealment. To appear ingenuity is not to be naive. It is knowing how far you should show your vision. It is maintaining control of the situation without having to lead the debate. It is driving without having to command. When you dominate this art, it may seem harmless, but you see everything. And most importantly, you know exactly when you act. This idea echoes in other thinkers. Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, said the victory begins with disguise. Be strong, look weak. The mistake for him was part of tactical wisdom. Gandhi, with his famous phrase, "Talk only if it is to improve silence," reinforces this power of containment. And Socrates, with his Socratic irony, pretended to know less to lead others to reflect more. The great lesson here is, showing everything you know all the time is not proof of intelligence, it's proof of insecurity. The wise need not prove. He observes, understands, acts precisely. The strength of the mind is often in its ability to contain itself. Pretending ignorance is actually an advanced form of social intelligence. It requires self-control, environmental reading, mastery of the ego itself. This is not a manipulation, but an emotional wisdom. It is choosing when it is worth talking, and when it is worth even letting the other believe you had the best idea. In the end, who looks silly can be the only one in the room that understood everything. And for that very reason, he chose to shut up. There is a kind of power that does not need applause, that does not shout, that does not impose, that does not display, but still transforms everything around. It is the power of silence. And Schopenhauer, as well as other great thinkers, knew that. In a world where everyone wants to talk, who knows how to hear, he stands out. Silence, when used with intelligence, is not absence. It is concentrated presence. It is a form of authority. While the others try to assert themselves by words, the observer in silence analyzes, connects, interprets, and when it decides to speak, each word has weight. Plato said, "The sages speak because they have something to say, the fools because they need to say something." Schopenhauer takes this idea ahead by suggesting that not only speaking should be thoughtful, but also not speaking can be an active, strategic choice. Sometimes, what you don't say reveals more than any speech. In meetings, debates, discussions, the figure that observes in silence often causes more impact than one that monopolizes speech. And when that person finally pronounces, everyone pays attention, not by imposition, but because silence built expectancy. The speech, in this case, becomes climax. It is a game of perception. When you speak all the time, it reveals your limits, exposes your ideas ahead of time, wastes energy. When it speaks little, but with intention, you control the time and effect of your presence. Silence becomes part of your strategy. This principle also applies to personal life. In times of conflict, sometimes silence avoids unnecessary wounds. In delicate conversations, he allows the other to reveal himself more than he would reveal in the face of arguments. And in pressure situations, silence preserves its inner clarity. Strategic silence is neither cowardice nor passivity. It is choice. It is knowing that you do not need to prove what is already clear. It is to have security, not to need to win every discussion. It is having a vision to know that in certain battles, the strongest is the one who does not enter the fight. To speak less is not to nullify, is to position yourself more strongly. Because in an environment where everyone disputes space, silence becomes noble territory. Who knows how to use it? Conquest. No noise, no hurry. And with a kind of respect that no intelligence display could achieve. The need for recognition is one of the greatest traps for those who want to exert real influence. Many want to lead, but do not know how to guide. They want to be right, but they do not know how to sow ideas. They want to be heard, but they don't know how to hear it first. Schopenhauer teaches us a form of leadership that does not require stage, the invisible leadership. This kind of leadership does not seek prominence, it operates behind the scenes, planting ideas on the fertile ground of others' minds, delicately, with respect, with emotional intelligence. That's when you know what needs to be done, but let the other believe it was his idea. That's when you're right, but you don't have to rub it in anyone's face. Instead of imposing, you inspire. Instead of convincing, you drive. This subtlety is one of the biggest signs of maturity and wisdom. What's more, it is a way of preserving the dignity of others. When someone feels that he was respected in his autonomy, even if he was discreetly influenced, he approaches and does not move away. Schopenhauer believed that when you make someone feel humiliated, even without intention, you lose something you may never recover: sincere respect. When you value the other, it allows you to see yourself as part of the solution. You not only solve a problem, you build a bond. This way of acting requires containment of the ego, requires giving up credit, but the return is immensely greater, because in the end, who really leads is not the one who screams louder or takes control, is the one who transforms the environment without the need for immediate recognition. In the professional environment, for example, this is gold. Avoid correcting a boss in public. Let a colleague shine, even when you know you could do better. Suggest ideas subtly, so that they seem to emerge from the team. This creates confidence, and confidence is the currency of any lasting relationship. Thus, leading is no longer an act of command and becomes an act of listening. Silent care with the other, with the relationship, with the long-term impact. And as Schopenhauer understood, true respect is not born of the exposed superiority, but of the subtle, almost invisible influence that touches the other without hurting him. We live in a culture obsessed with visibility. Success needs to be shown, intelligence needs to be validated, the achievement needs to be celebrated in a public square. But Schopenhauer invites us to look at this impulse with suspicion. For him, the desire to be displayed often reveals more insecurity than power. And the true brightness is one that does not need to be announced. Shining too much in certain environments is like lighting a lighthouse in the middle of night. It draws attention, but it also attracts threats. When you stand out excessively, it arouses a subtle type of hostility. People feel exposed around them, insecure, overshadowed, and what could be admiration becomes envy. What should be inspiration becomes competition. This perception is not new. Lao Tse already said that the sage wears simple clothes but keeps a treasure in his heart. The idea is clear. The more valuable you are inside, the less you need to demonstrate on the outside. True shine doesn't need spotlight. He manifests himself in silence. Socrates, with his philosophical irony, pretended ignorance not only to provoke reflection, but also to protect himself. His famous phrase, "I just know I know nothing," was not self-exam, it was strategic humility. He knew that teaching with arrogance generates resistance, but teaching with humility opens doors. Schopenhauer saw the same pattern in everyday relationships. He warned that displaying achievements, constantly correcting others, or trying to prove value at all times is not just unnecessary, it's dangerous. Because it puts you in evidence in a world where few know how to deal with the success of others. Maintaining a discreet profile is therefore a choice of wisdom. You don't hide out for fear. You choose the momentary anonymity to preserve your freedom, to act without being sabotaged, to grow without being prevented, and especially to cultivate respect without having to ask for it. Silent power is one that does not cause fuss, but transforms the environment wherever it goes. He does not dispute space. He occupies with presence, and this presence is so solid that it does not need an explanation. Schopenhauer knew that in many cases, hiding is the highest form of intelligence, because by not provoking the ego of others, you protect yourself, and in the end, it ends up coming further, with less friction, more respect and peace that the exaggerated glow was never able to bring. In the end, what Schopenhauer proposes is not disguise. It is wisdom. It is not pretense. It is consciousness. The art of making silly is not about deceiving others, but about not having to prove anything. It is about realizing that often the biggest demonstration of intelligence is to choose when and how to use it. This posture requires maturity, because the impulse of asserting itself, showing that you know, to overcome each discussion is natural. But it is also the impulse that most destroys relationships, that sabotage careers, which further drives valuable people. True power is to master this impulse and to replace it with a more strategic, more subtle, more effective action. Genuine respect does not come from the imposition. It comes from elegance, to know how to listen before you speak, to perceive the environment before reacting. Understanding that not every truth needs to be said and not every victory needs to be displayed. Sometimes the greatest merit is to let the other win, and yet to conduct everything with mastery. This is not weakness. It is domain. It's self-control. It is real influence. And above all, it is the ability to generate admiration without having to ask it. Schopenhauer reminds us that it is not necessary to shine all the time to be light, that there is power in containment, that there is authority in silence, that there is beauty to seem simple when you carry a whole world inside. The next time you are facing the temptation to impose yourself, breathe, note, evaluate, and perhaps find out that the greatest act of intelligence is not to prove anything. It is to act lightly, to let others speak and allow their attitudes to speak louder than any argument. Because, as Lao Tse said, the wise is like water. It flows without confrontation. It occupies its space and transforms everything. Wherever it goes, this is the real respect. This is the true power. In a time when everyone tries to prove something, the true strength is in those who do not need, who knows what it carries inside, and chooses not to show off. In those who act lightly, listen carefully and speak only when necessary. As Schopenhauer taught us, wisdom is not in superior, but in knowing when it does not seem. If this video made sense to you, enjoy now. This helps the content to reach more people who, like you, are seeking to reflect more depth. Subscribe to the channel to follow other topics like this and share this video with someone you think would understand the value of this message. And tell me in the comments, have you ever made a silly in any situation for wisdom? Let's talk.